The Indian Ocean, the second largest ocean on Earth, vast, restless, and deceptively calm. Hemmed in by Africa to the west, Asia to the north, the frozen emptiness of Antarctica to the south, and opening into the Pacific near Australia in the east, this ocean has quietly shaped the destiny of civilizations. Yet for centuries, very few truly understood its strategic power. Perhaps the only ones who did, completely and ruthlessly, were the British rulers of India in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Why? Because long before air routes, this ocean was the main artery of global trade. From the Middle Eastern empires to Europe, from India to the Southeast Asia and the Far East, commerce moved not over land but over water. The so-called legendary Silk routes? Impressive, yes, but they paled in comparison to the scale, speed and volume of trade carried through the Indian Ocean and the present-day Arabian Sea. The ancient Greeks and Romans even had a name for it. They called the Arabian Sea and the northern Indian Ocean the Erythraean Sea, a reminder that this waterway has always been the central to global power. And it was these routes that the British Empire was determined to dominate. After the opening of the Suez Canal, one strategic truth became obvious. Whoever controls the Indian Ocean controls access to Asia and the Far East. This was not just geography, this was geopolitics. Rooted in this hard realism was a deep and persistent British anxiety about Russia. Winston Churchill, like many British strategists before him, was forever apprehensive about Russian intentions. In fact, one of the guiding motivations of the British to actively promote Muslim desire for a separate state of Pakistan and partition of India was the need to create a buffer for India against Russian influence. But even before communist Russia, the British were apprehensive of Tsarist Russia also. The fear was simple and enduring. Russia, a vast land power, had no reliable year-round warm water ports. And the shortest, most effective route to such access lay southward, towards the Indian Ocean. This fear gave birth to the Afghan wars, which demarcated Afghan borders. Britain tried to create buffer zones between Russia and India, not out of charity, but out of strategic necessity. Deny Russia access to warm waters, and you deny true naval power. For centuries, Western diplomacy and military maneuvering revolved around this single objective. And then quietly, without gunfire or conquest, it ended. With a single stroke of pen. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Russian President Vladimir Putin signed the Reciprocal Exchange of Logistics Support Agreement, or RELOS, a military logistic pact that allows Russian naval vessels round-the-year access to Indian ports and naval facilities for replenishment, repairs, and maintenance. In return, Indian naval vessels gain access to Russian facilities. The result? For the first time in history, the Russian Navy was assured logistical access to the Indian Ocean, the very outcome the British Empire and the West had tried to prevent for generations. Russian ships can now operate routinely in waters already frequented by American, British, and French naval forces. What centuries of Western strategy sought to deny has been enabled not through war, but through diplomacy. A masterstroke by Moscow. So how did the world reach this point? The answer lies not in Moscow, but in Washington. The increasingly uncertain and transactional nature of the US foreign policy has deeply unsettled even its closest allies. In India's case, the discomfort had been acute. The Trump administration's overt engagement with Pakistan's military leadership, despite long-standing Indian security concerns, has been widely perceived in New Delhi as a disregard for Indian sensitivities. Compounding this is Washington's selective use of economic pressure. The US imposed an additional 25% tariff on top of an existing 25% on Indian goods, citing India's purchase of Russian oil. Yet European countries which continue to buy Russian energy despite the Ukraine conflict face no such punitive escalation. To Indian policymakers, the message was unmistakable. Faced with unpredictability from the West, India did what it has historically done best. It recalibrated its strategic autonomy. Russia has been India's all-weather friend, and RELOS is less a provocation than a consequence. a response to unnecessary pressure and diplomatic muscle fixing. Some analysts argue that RELOS is merely Russia's version of the LEMOA, or the Logistics Exchange Memorandum of Agreement India signed with the United States in 2023. Technically, they are similar. Strategically, they are not, because RELOS opens the doors far beyond the Indian Ocean. Through reciprocal access to Russian ports, Indian naval vessels gain the ability to operate in Arctic waters where new shipping lanes are emerging due to climate change and rising temperatures. A warm water nation like India now finds itself with a legitimate pathway into the Arctic alongside Russia, the US, Canada, and other polar powers. That is not a small shift. That is a geopolitical realignment. Few realize the full implications of RELOS. The agreement quietly alters the balance of power across the Eastern Hemisphere. It signals the gradual erosion of unquestioned Western dominance in the Indian Ocean and the rise of a more multipolar maritime order. The great game, it seems, has returned, but this time in the Indian Ocean. Stay tuned to globalheadwinds.com as we continue to decode the fast-changing geopolitical winds shaping our world. And history, once again, is being written quietly, far from the headlines.